Hey everybody, it's Lindsay from North End Organic Nursery, and here's your Garden Minutes. So today we're going to talk about seed starting. We start seeds here in Idaho indoors during the months of January, February, March, maybe even a little bit in April in order to get a head start on our upcoming growing season. And we actually have 3 legit growing seasons, in my opinion, here in Idaho. Just because we can't grow tomatoes all year long doesn't mean that we don't have a plethora of garden food that we can be producing from as early as mid-February, honestly, all the way through to around the 1st of December. On a warm year, you can be growing throughout the winter with row cover, which we'll be covering later. So the purpose of seed starting is to get that head start because we are in Idaho and we do have still a limited season for especially some of those frost intolerant or heat loving crops that really need that full amount of summertime plus some in order to produce fully. So if we were living in a semi-tropical place that we could just place a seed outside in mid-February and let it grow in the ground all the way to fruition without seeing a frost, then seed starting might not be as necessary. But there are still some advantages to starting seeds indoors regardless of your outside climate. But here in Idaho, one of the number one reasons we want to start seeds is to extend our growing season. So by starting our seeds indoors, we are giving our plants anywhere from a 4 to 12 week head start on the growing season by letting them germinate and incubate indoors with a controlled environment that will not get frosted until we're ready to put them outside. Now, there's some plants that you can actually start indoors that don't mind the frost, but they still need warmer conditions than what we have naturally going on outside in order to germinate and be ready to go outdoors. Controlling germination is really important. We control germination by giving our seeds that perfect humid environment that will promote germination through the combination of moisture, seed starting medium, and heat. Once we can germinate those seeds properly, then we can keep them indoors and give them the light that they need in order to do the growing that they need to do indoors. However, let's say we were to start those same seeds outdoors if it was a possibility. As you place them outdoors, there's the possibility that a night gets too cold or a bird comes by or some other kind of animal decides to pick up your seed and take it home for a snack. The soil gets dry. Maybe the soil is too hard, too soft, too wet. The seed rots. When we're starting indoors with a seed starting medium that we have complete control over, we will get a much higher germination rate out of those seed packets that we have purchased and brought home, and we will be able to select then from those germinated seeds that did so well which plants look the best. So here's a secret in the nursery industry is that when we start seeds and when most companies are going to start seeds or most people, they will just take every plant that germinates and looks healthy and they'll plant it outside or they'll make it available for sale. What you have the opportunity to do as a home seed starter is to actually germinate more seeds than you would like to be planting outside. Let's say you want 2 San Marzano tomatoes. Well, you have a 72 cell tray that we're going to be showing here in a little bit, and you decide that maybe I'm going to plant an entire row of 8 of that San Marzano tomato. And then when it comes time to pot up those tomatoes, you can say, which 2 out of these 8 look the best? And genetically, you're probably getting a more vigorous seed. Not all seeds that come out of your seed packet are created equal. There are some that have a stronger genetic pull to them than some other ones will, and you have that opportunity to make that selection. Okay, next let's talk about seed starting medium. There are several different types of mediums that you can choose from. And when we say medium, that means that substrate or environment in which you're going to place your seed for it to germinate. So the classic seed starting medium is going to be a seed starting soil. Make sure, like with all things we talk about in these videos, you're choosing a 100% organic seed starting medium. They do not need to be complicated. What we're looking for is an environment that is safe and somewhat sterile if you can't control the organisms that are going into it. and that will retain moisture but also drain. So this particular seed starting medium from Gardener and Bloom has peat moss, perlite, pumice, and washed sand. So that pumice and washed sand are there to help allow drainage, so you're not having too wet, heavy soil, but the peat moss is there to retain the moisture, and the perlite's there to hold airspace. So you actually need something that both holds water, drains water, and holds air all at once to give your seeds that kind of ideal situation. Now, there are some other seed starters out there that actually have more ingredients in them. The seed starting soil from Dr. Earth, which I really like as well, does a great job with adding just enough, a little bit of the nutrients into it to give your plants kind of a start. You can also combine this with a little bit of worm castings, which is not sterile, but anything that passes through a worm automatically becomes safe for plants. So this alone, though, will do a great job of starting your seeds and giving them a nice, moist, well-draining environment to start their life. The next option is using something that is a self-contained little peat pellet. Now, this is actually not peat as in peat moss. This is what we call coco peat, or coconut fibers that are a byproduct of the coconut industry. So it's also a recycled, sustainable product, and they envelop them in these little biodegradable socks, for lack of better words, and they come in this little compressed peat pellet, okay? Now, once you lay this in a cup of water like this, or in your tray, it will begin to absorb the liquid in the water, and it'll puff up just like a sponge. After you let it sit there for, I don't know, it took me about 5 minutes to do this one, you get this expanded little peat pellet with a hole in the top that allows you to place the seed for germination purposes. This is a great option for beginners especially. It's tidy, you don't have to worry about filling trays, popping out trays. It's also a good option for tender-rooted plants that are in the cucurbit family. We'll touch on that a bit more later. The downside with this is really that it has no nutrients to it, so kind of like that plain seed starter mix, it will require fertilization, but that's not a big deal. Also cost, they run about 20 cents a piece, so if you're gonna be doing lots and lots and lots of seed starting, that can add up. However, again, for a beginner, this is a great way to go. It's easy, it's compact, it's tidy. You don't have to worry about messing with a lot of stuff. So, Coco Peat pellets. For people who are feeling a little bit more adventurous, you can try something like a Grodan rock wool seed starting medium. This is a product that will do a great job of holding water. So you can see this Grodan is a rock wool. So think of taking like limestone, turning it into lava, and then blowing it out like insulation, and you kind of get the texture of what this Grodan is. And it's fantastic for holding moisture and also not having the seed get overrun with moisture. It pulls enough moisture away but leaves enough there. This is fantastic for somebody who might want to start seeds but may not be that great at remembering to water them, because this will make sure that things stay moist for quite a long time. Again, no nutritional content in this, so there's nothing to feed your seedlings once they have consumed the amount of nutrients that is in that seed to start out with. Once they get to that first or second set of true leaves, you will need to fertilize. So we're going to talk a bit more about that later. I'm pretty good about getting ahead of myself, but just know that this is a great place to start your seeds, but you'll need to bump them up fairly soon after they have come up out of here. By the time they hit their first set of true leaves, you can fertilize in here, but it's a little bit trickier, especially if you're using organic fertilizers, because there's no soil to really help break down those organic fertilizers and make them available to the plant. It doesn't work quite as well. If you are doing something hydroponically and using hydroponic nutrients, then the Grodan is great, and it'll absorb those hydroponic nutrients quite well that are salt-based, not organic. Grodan. Another product we have at the nursery is called Eden Valley. It is a great potting soil, a very, very premium potting soil that has biochar in it, which I love. And it's a great seed starting medium, but it's a little bit coarser than what I would consider a normal seed starting medium to be, which makes it sometimes a little bit harder if you have really small seeds and you're trying to seed into a container like this. If you're seeding directly into either 4-inch pots like these, or into coconut coir pots, I highly recommend the Eden Valley as a way to directly sow into them. Great nutrients, great structure, but it's a little bit coarse for doing a lot of fine seeding of small seeds that you want to make sure you have enough fine absorbent material near the seeds in order for them to stay moist during the duration of their germination. The next thing we want to talk about is containers. There are several different types of containers that you can start your seeds in, from open tray seeding, where you're actually just putting the dirt directly into the tray and then seeding your seeds into the tray in an open fashion. This is good if you're really good about spacing your seeds out and you're using types of plants that will not be disrupted by having the roots ripped apart from other plants. Note to self, I'm going to say this several times, cucurbits, cucumbers, melons, and squash, that whole family of fruiting vegetables because they have a fruit on them, so they're not technically a vegetable, they're a fruit. They do not like their roots looked at, let alone torn apart. So open tray seeding, not a good idea for them. What we do open tray seeding for a lot of is for things in the allium family. So onions can be planted densely in a open tray type situation without any dividers in the cells, just fine. And then when you're ready to transplant them outside, you literally just take the chunk of seeded and rooted out onion sets, and I call them little rat tails because that's what they look like to me. You can just take a chunk, separate each one of those little rat tails out and place them in the garden, and you're good to go. You don't need to worry about having little compartments. We'll use little compartments in the nursery industry because we're selling things as a standalone quantity, but we'll usually just direct seed them into these little 3.5-inch pots, which is another great way to do onions. You can just seed them directly into here and then take them out to your garden. So a couple different options there. What most of us are going to end up using is a tray like this. This is a 72 cell tray. Probably the most common size in both seed starting and in the nursery business because it's big enough to hold a decent amount of soil to get started bigger plants that have bigger seeds like corn and beans and such, but it's small enough to still cushion and give a small, tight environment for smaller seeds like tomatoes and basil. It's not a good idea to plant seeds that are small in a large container, and vice versa. You don't want to plant seeds that are large in a small container. So no small seeds in a large container, no large seeds in a small container. You really want to give them the seed size that's proportionate to their size. Part of the reason for this is the bigger the seed, the deeper it must be planted. In general, our rule of thumb is for the seeds that you are trying to plant, 2 to 3 times the thickness of that seed is how deep you plant it down. So if you're familiar with what a basil seed looks like, or an onion seed, or even a tomato seed, they're quite small. And so you're basically going to be planting them in here barely below the surface. Whereas with a corn or a bean, you're going to be shoving it down deep. So this is a good size because it can kind of take both of them. But if you were to put a large seed in a small cell, the chances of it drying out and not being able to germinate that seed are much higher versus if it had a larger amount of soil to pull moisture from and be able to germinate. Same thing with the small seeds in a large container. When you put a seed into a large container and water it, the water is going to go down. Now, through just physics, it will wick back up a certain amount, but not typically enough to make it to the surface. So you're going to be constantly chasing that plant and that moisture level with your sprayer, and you have a higher chance of it drying out and not germinating versus doing it in a small cell. Just trust me. Pick the right size for the cell and you'll be good. Another option for seed starting is using a soil blocker. A soil blocker is a stainless steel contraption, it's the best way I can put it, that will literally make almost like soil bricks. And I will link the video we have to making soil blocks in the comments of this video, so you can see that. We're not going to go through the whole process of making soil blocks today, but I will show some pictures here on the side as we are talking so you can kind of get an idea. But we have 2 primary sizes that people use. This one is called the Micro 20. It is 20 different cells and they make small little itty bitty blocks. This is great if you want to create a soil block, place it in your tray, and this will probably give you about 288 cells per tray, give or take. which is equivalent to a 288 cell that we use in the nursery industry. Great if you're trying to start a lot of seeds in a small space because you have limited light, heat, whatever. Good option. And then at some point, once they outgrow these little soil blocks, they can be potted up or potted on to a soil block that is like this Mini 4. So this Mini 4 actually has a little dimple thingy in there. That dimple is designed so that when you make your soil block, it creates a little spot for you to put your seed in. This little part can be taken out and replaced with a square inside of it that will be the exact size of the micro 20 that can then be dropped right into the top of the soil block created by the Mini 4. So why would we want to use soil blocks? Soil blocks are a really cool option for people who want to stay away from plastics and want to use something that's going to be a lifelong tool that you can reuse year after year after year without buying more plastic, without putting more plastic into the environment. It's also really healthy for the plants because the soil block that's created in the soil blocking process is completely self-contained with no edges on it. And what that allows the plant to do is as it germinates and grows roots out, when it hits the air, because it's not hitting any plastic or sides, it will automatically do what we call air pruning. Air pruning allows the plant to stay, keep its roots in an outward direction instead of circling around. If a plant hits an edge to something, whether it be a clay pot or a plastic pot, it will hit that edge and it doesn't see that as a final destination because there's no air there and it'll circle around. So you get healthier plants that aren't root bound when you're using soil blocks. They are fairly sturdy when made properly. I like to use a seed starting soil in combination with worm casting. So I do about 4 parts of the seed starting soil that I just showed you over here, and then about 1 part worm castings, and then I wet it down to the consistency of peanut butter, and then press the soil blocker into that soil, and then you eject it with this little ejection handle. Again, we have an entire video just on soil blocking if you want to check it out in the comments. The next important thing you want to make sure you consider when you're doing seed starting is heat. So we talked earlier, the reason why we're starting indoors is because we have that temperature controlled environment that allows seeds to germinate without having to deal with the cold and fluctuating temperatures outside. That being said, if your thermostat set to 70 indoors, it will not translate into a 70 degree soil temperature. Water will always cool the soil, and therefore the soil will be much cooler than the ambient air temperature. What you need to do for especially plants that really like the heat, like tomatoes and peppers, is you want to provide them bottom heat. And the best way to do that is with a nursery designed or a home or a seed starting designed heat mat. These guys are made especially for putting underneath of trays, and they will provide a conductive heat that comes up and heats the soil, and you'll actually be able to feel the soil be warmer. That makes such a huge difference when it comes to germination rates. I'm not going to go into the whole long story that I sometimes do in my classes, but let me just tell you that we went from not using heat mats way back in the early days, and we were getting germination rates of maybe 60-70% after about 14 days, to using heat mats and getting 95 to 100% germination rates in 3 to 5 days. It makes an exponential difference, and the reason why the germination rates improve so much with using the heat mat is because the seed will have the moisture and the heat that it needs to germinate, and so it pops up quicker. If it's cold soil, it can sit there in the moisture and rot a lot easier and may not have that same vigor. So you're setting your plants up right from the very beginning by making sure they have bottom heat as they're germinating. So these heat mats, I've already opened this up, just kind of shoved it back in the box for the unboxing feel of it, I guess. This is a mat that is specifically designed for one tray, a 10 by 20 tray. 10 by 20 trays are the standard in the nursery industry, so this is really good for any standard tray that you would normally find. So it fits right underneath of the tray. I set my tray right on top of it. I plug it in right down in wherever your outlets are, and it stays a nice, consistent, safe temperature. They do have thermostats if you're trying to really hit a very specific temperature for your germination, but I've never used one. You can just use these just straight up and walk away from it. Now, do you use heat with every type of plant that you're trying to grow? I would use this for everything to germinate, okay? Now, heat-loving plants, those plants that are going to provide a fruiting body that you're going to harvest, okay? So let's break these things down into two different categories. You have vegetables and you have fruits. Vegetables tend to be your spring vegetables and your fall vegetables. So these are plants that can tolerate the cold, and they actually don't like the real hot temperatures of summertime. So when you think of a vegetable, think of where you're eating the leaf, stem, or root of the plant. So carrots, beets, chard, kale, arugula, spinach, cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, these are all vegetables. Once you germinate them, you can take the heat off and they will continue to grow, and it's actually recommended that you don't keep them too hot because it could make them grow a little bit irregular and a little bit stressed because they don't like super hot temperatures. But everything likes to germinate in warmth, right? Now with your peppers and tomatoes, I like to keep them on heat from the beginning to the end because they really like the heat, and it helps them to grow more vigorously like they would if the seed was outside and germinated in the outside temperatures that it found ideal. This is a 10 by 20. Now, if you've got multiple trays, you can do, there's mats that come in 20 by 20, 20 by 48, and I think they even go up from there. I know at the nursery we have 4 sizes, and I forget all the different sizes, but I know this is the smallest all the way up to, I think it's like a 60-inch long one. So if you've got a lot of seed starting you're going to be doing, you can spread it out along your counter or wherever you're doing it. Another fun thing about heat mats for seed starting. Let's say that you don't have a ton of shelf space to do your seed starting, and the best place you can do it is in a cooler basement or even a garage that doesn't get to be freezing. Now, a heat mat can do a lot, but it can only do so much. The combination of this and the Nanodome that I'm going to be talking about next can give you a complete microclimate anywhere you place the two of them together, because the heat mat will be providing that bottom heat and the Nanodome will be trapping that heat on the inside of it, so you can grow in places outside of the immediate environment of your home. I've even had people use the heat mats in greenhouses outside where they had access to electricity in order to heat the plants, and then underneath a secondary dome and be able to not have to have forced air heat in that space. And we do that in our greenhouses as well. The next really important factor to consider is light. Number one problem that we see at the nursery when it comes to people coming in with seed starting issues is linked to insufficient light. So these babies, if they were grown outside, they would get from this time of year about 7:30, 8 in the morning till about 5 o'clock at night of full spectrum sun. And even on a cloudy day, full spectrum sun does give a lot of light. When you bring them indoors, unless you're one of those people that has a direct south-facing window where the plants will have uninterrupted eyesight with the sun as it goes across the southern sky here in the winter time, you don't have enough light. And even if you do go into that window, make sure if you put plants into a window, make sure you shift them 180 degrees every day, because they like to lean. And as they lean towards the light, then they kind of grow sideways, then you want to turn them around so they lean the other direction. What I do highly recommend, and I don't think you'll regret it, is investing in a kit that gives you the light on top of the tray with the dome. That way you don't have to worry about legginess. So what is legginess? As plants are growing, if I'm a seedling and I've got my warm soil, I pop up out of the soil, I put out 2 little pseudo leaves. It's called a dicot or a dicotyledon, unless I'm a grass, in which case I only have one. I'm a monocot. So things in the grass family will come out with 1 leaf. Things not in the grass family are going to come out with 2 dicotyledons. And these are solar collectors. It's basically the seed popping up through the soil, breaking open, and being that first solar collection site for the plant to use that energy to then start metabolizing what's in its seed to put out roots and start working on its first set of true leaves. The first set of true leaves are the two leaves that will come out opposite of those dicotyledons. Those leaves will look like what the plant will be when it grows up, okay? So once I pop up, I have those two little solar collectors. I don't see enough light where I am, so I find whatever the brightest source of light is and I start growing towards it. And what happens is that the little plants will get long and skinny and they will start leaning in towards wherever they can find just a little bit of light. We don't want that. We want stocky, short, robust, beefy little plants that are short to the ground because they popped out of the ground, they opened up their little solar collectors, boom, they found all the light they needed, and they just stopped wasting their energy looking for light and they started working on the next steps of their development. By having a light available right on top of the plants, it makes a world of difference. Now you can set up different systems from what we're about to show you here by hanging growing lights, which we have individual growing lights for people if you want to do them on a shelf. But if you are just getting started into this, or you have limited space, or you just like simplicity, check out the Blaster Nanodome. So this one is the LED version. I'm just going to take this cover off. And what it comes with is a 7-inch domed lid, okay? Put this over here. And then it also comes with the LED light. This fits directly on top of, let me take all this stuff out really quick. It fits directly on top of the lid, and you can add multiple setups in a row so that you can have multiple LED dome lids going. Now, when I keep on saying LED, we do have this and it is available as a fluorescent, but the LEDs are so efficient and they become far more cost effective. They have a brighter, fuller spectrum of light that most people are going towards LED. That being said, I know a lot of people who really love the fluorescents and they find something about the fluorescent that is not offered with the LED. Everyone's got their favorites in every department of life. I'm not knocking fluorescents. I just prefer the LED because it's cooler and it's brighter and a broader spectrum, less heat, less energy. There is a cost difference, maybe about 15% difference in price, but I find it to be worth it in the long run. So I'm going to plug that in and then I turn on my light. You can see how it lights up really nicely in here. It's gonna come right at you. You can see it's a really super bright spectrum of LED lights here. Now, when you have your little plants growing inside of the dome, this provides all the light it needs. Question, how often and how long do you need to keep the light on? After you've planted your seeds, you can count on 2 to 3 days where nothing's gonna pop up. All they need is the heat and moisture first, and then once those little solar collectors come up, they will need the light. So after about day 2 or 3 on almost anything, I put the light on my dome and I let it stay there 24 hours a day. It'll stay on 24 hours a day until I see at least 90% germination across the board. Once I have 90% germination, I will start turning it off during my sleeping hours. So if I go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, that's when I turn off my light. If I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, that's when I turn on my light. So it's giving it an 8-hour approximate rest. If you sleep longer, I guess your plants are gonna get to sleep longer too. But it gives it that approximate 8-hour rest so that it doesn't have light on it all the time and it can work on other things besides collecting sunlight for energy. And it's just a good, healthy way to go about it. So great way to, this is all I need, and it takes up 10 inches by 20 inches anywhere in your household. You can grow your own seeds with this setup. So the Nanodome comes with my little instruction booklet here, but it also comes with connection cords because one of the cool things about this setup is that each one of these light systems are able to be daisy chained together. That allows you to plug in once and then be able to connect multiple units together. So I've got another one over here that I've got some peppers growing in, and I'm going to plug in to this existing one, and boom, I have 2 nanodomes now growing side by side. If you want to, you can, if your space is not linear, you can put them front to back. Let me see if I can unplug this here and show you front to back. So once I have them sitting front to back like this, I would then change the orientation of my lights to be front to back as well. Okay, and then once I get to this point, I can just daisy chain them again. And now I am growing in a direction that gives me this kind of square. I don't know if you can see it all on the camera there. So I now have my two nanodomes side by side, and they still have two lights that are equally spreading out amongst them with a connection here in the back. And I'm growing now in a 20 by 20 space versus a 40 by 10 space. So great thing about these little units is that you have options. Let's go through the seed starting process. So today we're going to start out by using our Gardener in Bloom seed starter. I'm using this fun tidy tray that we carry at the store that I really like because it helps with, especially when I'm doing indoor projects with seeding. It makes it far less messy, hence the name tidy tray, right? Now, when the soil comes out of the bag, it can be quite dry. So make sure that you kind of take note of the dryness level. What I'm gonna do right now is I'm going to take my tray. This is my 72 cell tray, and nothing fancy or glamorous about this. Just gonna fill my tray. And I wanna get it as evenly full all over. It always wants to be more full in the middle than on the edges. We're gonna try to get it equally full all across the board. Okay, looks pretty full across there. Gonna kind of give it a shake, see how much it can settle down. Move the soil around a bit more. Shake, 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 without shaking it out. That's not a good thing. And now I'm going to take a second tray. That matches the same size tray that I have here. And I'm just going to give it a nice, I'm gonna line it up so that the holes all match up, and I'm just gonna press it down. We're just trying to get out any of the fluff that might be happening here. And then once I've done that, put my tray to the side. I'm gonna kind of just wipe everything down a bit. And it looks like it can press it down just a little bit more than what I shook it down into. And I'm gonna sort of fill in some low spots here. All right, good. Next thing is really important because this is kind of a dry soil. We want to make sure that it's moist to start out with. So here's another thing that I would add to the list, and I'll have a list at the end of the presentation that says these are the things I would make sure you have to be successful at seed starting. The first thing is a sprayer. Now, a watering can is great for when you're outside or when you've got well-established plants, but when you're talking about baby plants, you really need a gentle mist. That's where having a little pump sprayer is super duper helpful. So this is the one I've got in water in right now. These are some ones that we just got in the store. They're super cute. But what's nice about it is you pump it, and then you can even hear with no water in here, it gives you a nice even spray. And so you're not sitting there with a squeeze bottle going squirt, 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 squirt. Now, if you have a squirt bottle at home and you have the ability to adjust it to like a nice fine spray, by all means use it. But if you're gonna be doing a lot of seed starting over a long period of time, you will thank yourself for saving your carpal tunnel from doing that constantly. They also serve a lot of dual purposes, which I love. You can use them in the garden come in season. If you need to use an organic pest control, if you need to use this for horticultural vinegar for killing weeds, if you want to spray your plants with an organic nutrient or a fertilizer to do some foliar feeding, you will get a lot of use out of a little sprayer like this or like this one. This one just happens to have water in it already, so I'm just going to give it a nice wetting down. I'm going to make sure that all of the cells are nice and moist. This takes a little bit of time in the beginning because you don't want to start out with dry soil and then be trying to water it, as dry soil will wick away all the moisture that you're putting down on it. So I'm just going to take my time here and make sure it gets nice and moist. All right, I think I've got it just about moist enough. So for this round of starts, because I'm making this video right now in January, And I will link a seed starting guide also in the comments for this region. We are a zone 6B, 7A, and our particular seed starting dates are going to be different depending on who you are and where you're watching this video from. Our statistical last frost is usually about May 10th or about Mother's Day, and our statistical first frost in the fall is about October 7th. So we do the math back from those last frost dates to determine when you want to start your seeds to put them outside. Okay, so when do you put out your cold hardy crops? As a general rule of thumb, now remember, weather does not follow rules. You can have averages, and an average all means that on a particular date you have a 50-50 chance of what you expect to happen. So in the springtime, or late winter, technically speaking, I guess, we usually look at about St. Patrick's Day as being the general launch of the gardening season to plant out your spring veggies. Now, here in the Treasure Valley, I've had many a year where late February was warm enough to start putting stuff outside. And there's been other years when we still had 18 inches of snow on the ground all the way up until the late March. So you really just have to pay attention. I always like to use a weather app that looks out 2 weeks, and if it gives me good projections where we're gonna be in the just barely freezing temperatures with highs usually above 50, that's usually when I like to plant out my spring crops. And some of those crops you can plant outside by direct sowing. However, the cold soil will make them go slower. Warm soil makes plants go faster. So I will plant my outdoor crops inside and then transplant them outside around the dates that'll be listed in that seed starting guide that I'll link below. And it will allow you to get a head start on growing and then harvesting some of those spring crops too, because that's another key feature here in the Treasure Valley, is that after spring hits, summer comes really quickly, and a lot of these plants don't like the heat, so you really want to get them into the ground and harvested before we start hitting some of those really hot temperatures. So right now in mid to late January, probably late January is really what we're thinking about now, I'm going to be putting in my seed starting tray things that are going to be transplanted out in mid-March. By early to mid-March, I'll start thinking about doing my tomatoes and my regular peppers and eggplants, okra, things that will like the heat and can't be put outside until after the danger of frost has more than likely passed. Exception to the rule, super hot peppers. So if you are somebody who likes to grow peppers that, I'm not even gonna go there when it comes to some of the bathroom analogies, but there's peppers out there that are so hot that you really are an insanely brave individual to grow and eat them. Let's just leave it at that. And they need a lot more time and a lot more heat to grow inside before you transplant them outside. So if you're planning on growing Buchalokia ghost peppers, Carolina Reapers, oh my gosh, Scotch bonnet. There's so many different types of super hot peppers. You want to start those peppers inside now, and that's actually what I had growing in that little tray that you saw here a little bit earlier are some super hot peppers. So your cold crops you can start right now, and also your super hot peppers. As far as cold crops go, the ones that I really want to focus on are going to be the ones that take a long time. So things like Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli are definitely on the top of my list. Things that grow really, really, really fast, like arugula, you probably don't want to bother to start indoors just yet. Maybe wait until a couple of weeks from now. But remember, I'm filming this in late January, so please refer to the seed starting guide in the comments as far as what you need to be growing right now. I think I am, because I do plant things under frost blankets and some miniature greenhouse type situations outside. I am also going to be doing some lettuce. This is a Fertilize lettuce from our favorite local seed company, Snake River Seed Cooperative. I think I might plant some long red Florence onion and some cold hardy and will become a perennial Italian parsley, some lettuce, some I don't know. We'll see what we get to here. And then probably in the middle of March to the 1st of April is when I'll plant out my Joey Parker peppers. But today, let's start out with our curly roja kale. I can never get enough of that. All right, so I've got my seed packet. what I like to do, and typically I have this in a different direction, but for the camera, I'm gonna do it right here. Just take my 4 digits on both hands and line them up. And I just kind of make a little bit of an indent into here, just to kind of make a spot for the seed to nestle. And I'll do that again here in the middle. Perfect. All right, I'm going to take my curly row hog kale. Now, do you need to plant multiple cells per seed? Multiple seeds per cell. All right, I'm gonna start getting a little bit slap happy here, I guess. No, you do not. Most seeds will have a pretty high germination rate, and you can actually see on a lot of these, they'll say what their germination rate is. Having a hard time finding it quickly here, but most good seed companies will have their germination rates on their packets. However, that being said, for these guys, one, maybe a second seed will fall in there on accident, but overall, oh, so 2 just went in there. 2 just went in there just because they're so small. I'm just gonna get these seeded into here. Nothing tricky about this, I'm just dropping them in there. Now, remember what I said earlier about the fact that you don't want to bury small seeds with too much soil. These guys are a fraction of an inch. So I will come back over them and just dust them with a little bit of soil. So now I've got my seeds in here. It's going to dust them. All right, I have enough room on here. I don't need much more soil. Now I'm gonna come back and kind of give them a push in so that they have good soil contact. And I knew I was gonna do this before I started this video. I forgot to get plant markers, because you wanna make sure you mark the plants. Importantly, you wanna mark what the variety is. I always like to mark who the company is that I use so I can compare germination rates and decide if I wanna grow that again in a future year. But also just so you know what's what and the date that you grew it on. So I will have to do that tomorrow in post-edit time. But I'm gonna lay the seed packet here on the edge of where I planted it. Now I'm gonna use the same container. Let's do some lettuce. If you're gonna be planting multiple seeds in the same container, I highly recommend leaving one entire row open in case you accidentally have seeds go left and right, especially if you're planting seeds from the same family. So if I were to plant a broccoli right now, right next to the kale, it would look very similar, the seed would, and the baby plant would also look very similar. So it would make it very hard for you to say, is this a broccoli or is this a kale? Now I'm just gonna do this Pablo, it's really super small seeds. I'm just gonna do 2 rows. I don't need too much of this one particular type of lettuce. Not that it's not a fabulous lettuce, but it's just more than what I need. Cover up these little rows really quickly here, just with a light sprinkling of soil. Kind of press it down again. Now, seed starting really shouldn't be that daunting. These guys, they want to grow. Their genetics say, please grow. You just need to give them enough of a close enough ideal environment, not even perfect, and they will grow. So don't get too hard on yourself. I want some onions. Let's do some onions. I think I'll fill up. Now remember what I said about onions. You can do lots of onions. You can do multiples of those in your seed cells, because when you pull that out, you're gonna break them apart. So these guys, I will skip a row again, and I'm going to just densely seed, probably almost 5 seeds to 10 seeds per cell, and I'm just gonna plant them all. Because onions, it's a one and done kind of crop, unlike a kale or a lettuce where you can pick the leaves and let it keep growing. Once you pull an onion out of the ground, it is a done job. Okay, they're in here. Sprinkle my soil. Okay, I'm gonna press it down. And you could even take your tray and press it down again, but I'm just gonna leave this as it is. Okay, so now pretend I put my little markers in here, which I will do tomorrow. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Skip 1, 1, 2, 3. No, 1, 2, skip 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm making a note where I need to put my stuff tomorrow. I'm going to take my sprayer again, and we're going to water these in. So as I'm watering these in with this gentle spray, it's helping them all to get wet all the way through. You really want to do what you can to prevent your seeds from drying out even for a short period of time. It is a big problem in seed starting. When people walk away from their seeds, especially once they're on a heat mat, it's going to dry out a little bit faster. You need to check them at least twice a day. That does not mean you have to water them twice a day. You need to check them twice a day to make sure that they are not drying out. There's no need to bottom water at this point. Later on, it's not a bad idea to bottom water. Once the roots have reached all the way to the bottom, you can actually just lift up the tray and water underneath of them, and that's a great way to go about it. For now, topical water is super important. It's nice if the water goes all the way through, but really we just want it to make it down deep enough for these plants to germinate. So the mantra right now is frequent and shallow, where typically when we're watering any plants, whether it's a perennial, tree, shrub, grass, or vegetable, our mantra is deep but infrequent. So opposite right now. I always love to use the analogy that these are babies. What do babies do? They want a warm, cozy environment, and they want frequent, small feedings. So what we're doing here is we're giving them frequent, small feedings. And this is a great way to get your seeds germinated. So earlier we talked about cucurbits and things that have sensitive roots, not planting them into plastic containers or cells or that 72 cell tray. It's not ideal for them. These little peat pellets, the Coco Peat pellets that we swole up, that's a word, and they are now ready to be planted. This is a great option. Also using something like these, let's see, a good place to see the sign on here, the 6 plantable pots, also made out of coconut. These guys you just fill up with regular soil, but you plant the entire pot out in the garden. Now, I'll try to find a picture and show it here about what it looks like when I pull up a plant that's been planted in one of these coconut pots at the end of the season. It's crazy how thick and robust the roots are that will make it through here. You might or may not be able to tell in this video. I can see the light through them. I don't know if you can. Oh, the light's coming from this direction, so you probably can't, but you can. There is so much airspace that's coming through these that you do not need to worry about the roots getting through them. Some people are really concerned about that, so I'm just letting you know, not a concern. We can fill this up with soil and plant our seedling little seed into there, cucumber, melon, or squash. You could use these for tomatoes, beans, corn, whatever. We use the plastic pots in the nursery just because these guys, once they sit in a tray for too long next to other pots of its kind, the roots will actually grow into each other's pots. And that's awkward when someone's trying to pull a tomato out of a tray and they get like 3 other tomatoes connected to it. So we have to use plastic in the nursery. But for home, if you can keep them separated, I highly recommend the sustainability and the air pruning that you get out of a coconut pot. So let's say now it's way too early in January right now to be starting cucumbers, but let's pretend that it is, let's say, middle of April. Middle of April is about as early as I'd want to start anything in the cucumber, melon, or squash family because they grow so darn fast and they're ready to go super quick. So fast forward right now, anybody's watching this in mid-April, it's time to do your cucumbers, melons, and squash. I will take 1 seed. You could take 2 if you wanted to. Let's just go ahead and do 2. And I just plop them in the little hole up there. Now what I'm gonna do is just kind of squeeze the pellet, kind of press them down so that they get buried. Squeeze the pellet to have some of that soil go on top. Boom, done, plop it down. Because cucumbers, melons, and squash grow so quickly, if you start this in mid-April and you're planning on planting them out in early May, you probably won't even need to fertilize them. You would just take this with its little leaves going out and plop them right into the garden. So you know that that's where you planted your squash and that's where it's gonna grow, and you've already got a 2 to 3 week head start. So great way to do them in either this or that. Let's go back to these seeds that we started in the 72 cell tray. So I now have these seeds in the 72 cell tray. They have nice little holes in the bottom, so when it's time to transplant, you can take just like the end of a pencil or even just your pinky and push the plug through to transplant it. And I'll talk about transplanting and fertilizing here in a second. But to finish off this process, I'm gonna take my seeded and watered plants, I'm gonna place them in a tray, a 10 by 20 nursery tray that has no holes in the bottom. Why? Because I don't want water all over my floor. If you're growing in a greenhouse, I highly recommend putting this in a tray that has drainage, because that way you don't risk overwatering it and having it sit. But indoors, we just gotta be more careful, and we definitely wanna put them in a tray that does not have holes so it doesn't leak all over the place. So I've got my 72 cell tray, my nursery tray without holes, my heat mat right here, plop with some drama. I'm gonna plug it in, and then I'm going to take my Nanodome lid. Something to note about the Nanodomes too, we do have the lids in the 4 inches. This is a 7-inch lid that comes with the kit. The bottom comes with the kit too, not the insert. I do like the 4-inch lid. I really do like it actually for either early stages of germination, and I think I've got one down there, but it's just 4 inches. I don't need to show it to you. It's really good for cruciferous vegetables and lettuces too that kind of do better with the light down closer to them. That being said, if you are using the LED light with all of the brightness that it has, I think you'll be fine with the 7-inch lid, but the 4-inch lid wouldn't be a bad idea if you don't mind spending just an extra $5 to start out the plants with the light lower down on them. The closer the light is to the plants, the more intensity and the more lumens they're going to get, or candles, I think is what they measure it by. If you don't feel like buying the 4-inch lid, you're gonna be fine, but you'll even get stockier, happier plants if you also get the 4-inch lid. Gonna grab my light. Lay it directly in the ridge here, nice and tidy. Turn it on. And, well, actually, turn it off. You don't need the light right away. I'm just getting the setup going. But remember, 2 to 3 days, you should be fine without any light. After you hit that 3rd day, there's a chance things might start popping up, and I would recommend having the light on 24 hours a day to make sure that if anything pops up while you're not watching, it gets light right away. You don't want them to go even a few hours, if possible, without having good, direct, healthy amounts of light. Those early days with the light on top of it makes a big difference. So the next question becomes is, when do you feed them or fertilize? So we talked about the seed starting soils, a lot of them not having a ton of nutrients in them, if any at all. So at some point, that nutrient pack that is the seed and is the original amount of food that the plant needs to get up into that dicotyledon stage, into that first set of true leaves, will begin to diminish and go away. What you don't want to have happen is to have your plant go hungry. It will disrupt its growth cycle and make it so that it never really completely catches up. I mean, it might still be okay playing catch up, but we want the best, most vigorous plants from day one all the way through to the end. So after you see the first set of true leaves, so I'll put a picture up right now. Here's what a dicot looks like on a tomato. Now here's what the first set of true leaves looks like on a tomato. When you see those true leaves, you want to fertilize. Here is your mantra: weekly, weekly. Okay, can you remember that? Weekly meaning once a week. We want to fertilize when we're watering once a week. And you just do that with whatever, watering system that you have going on with your spray bottle or whatever. Weekly is half strength. Half strength because we don't want to overdo how much nutrients we're giving to these plants. But if we're giving them a little bit of fertilizer once a week, until they get to the stage where they need to get bumped up to a larger pot, or they look hungry. Now, what does looking hungry mean? Here we are, plant parents here, right? We got to determine when our kids are hungry. When they're little, they like to eat often and small amounts. As they get bigger, sometimes they like to eat even more and larger doses. So if you start to see your plant looking a little bit yellow, there are several reasons why that could happen. Sometimes it's disease, but a lot of times chlorosis is just hungry plants. So a fertilizer that I have like right here, this is Dr. Earth Pure Gold. This is one good option. The other really good option that I like is the Kellogg Gardener and Bloom High Growth. And the High Growth has a 402 for its fertilizer analysis. I'm going to talk about fertilizer here in a second. I can't forget to do that. So when your plant's looking a little bit hungry and starts looking a little bit pale in color, doesn't have that nice rich green color, you can up your fertilization. It won't hurt at all. But don't let your plants go hungry. Just try to pay attention to them. If you have any questions about whether they're hungry or not, you can bring them in and we can take a look at the nursery. But overall, you just want to look for them to stay nice and green and healthy. Let's talk about fertilizer and what the numbers mean. It's very important. So you have 3 numbers on every container of plant food. You can see here on this Dr. Earth Pure Gold, it's in reverse it looks like right now, but it's a 1, 1, 1. That means it's very low numbers and you don't need high numbers for seedlings. That's 1% nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, and 1% potassium. That is NPK. Everything a fertilizer will have those 3 numbers on them, and it's important that you understand what they represent. Nitrogen, the first number, green and protein. So anytime you need to have green growth, avoiding chlorosis, making sure that it has the energy and the nutrients to put on height and weight and bulk, you're looking at nitrogen. It's also super important for seed production and just the protein production in the plant. Protein is made out of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So you got to give the plant nitrogen in order to be able to create protein. The second number is phosphorus, P. That is for roots, fruits, flowers, and sweetness. So this is very important a little bit in the beginning, but you don't need a ton. Honestly, you really don't need hardly anything at all. It has enough in its seed to get it through that first growth cycle. But as the plant starts to grow and mature, it's going to need it for flower production, which will eventually lead to fruit production, which ultimately leads to seed production. It's also very important for the metabolism and the building of sugar molecules. So if you don't have enough phosphorus, you might not get that real high Brix sweetness that you want out of some of your vegetables. It's also super important for vegetables that have very extensive and elaborate roots that you're trying to cultivate as well. So we're looking at plants like potatoes, high phosphorus lovers, carrots and beets. They also need some phosphorus. Not super heavy eaters, but they still need that phosphorus in order to create really good rooting systems. The last number is K. K stands for potassium. I call potassium the regulator. It helps regulate the plant's ability to deal with heat stress, cold stress, dryness, moisture. It makes the plant more resilient and able to deal with the stresses of being a plant. So low amounts of potassium often lead to weak, kind of non-resilient plants. So you want to make sure that you have the potassium there. Like I said, this is a 111. The Gardener and Bloom high growth is a 402. Any fish, kelp, molasses combination that you might have, or just fish, just use it. It's not that important exactly the numbers you're using, as long as it's organic. Please stay away from things that are allegedly miraculous. Let's stick to the organic, real foods. Feed your plant real foods, and you eat real foods too, and everybody's going to be happy. How about it? Let's talk about some common problems that you might see in your adventures of seed germination. One of the first things is that you don't get good germination and they don't come up. This could be a result of you planted the seeds too deeply, not deep enough. Remember, we talked about finding that right height. You could have let them dry out, or maybe you overwatered them, which is another problem you don't want to have happen, and they became too moist and they rotted. Other things that you might want to take into consideration, though, is the germination rate of that particular species. Some plants just don't germinate that well, and they have if you look at the seed packet, it'll say, maybe germination rate of 20%. So that means for every 10 seeds that you plant, you're going to get 2 that are going to come up. Stevia is a great example for that. Stevia has a very low germination rate, and I think it's somewhere in the 10 to 20% range. So if you want one stevia plant, you better plant about 10 seeds for every plant. And other plants will need special treatment. For perennials, there's a lot of perennial plants out there that require what's called stratification. Stratification is cold treatment on plants that lets them signal, nature signals them that it's time to germinate at a certain point. So imagine if you are a lavender or a rosemary or any of these plants that drop their seeds possibly in the fall. They don't want their seeds to germinate right there and then, because the cold of winter is going to come and it's probably going to kill those tender little plants. So what nature has built into that seed is the need for cold before it can germinate. So it will hit the ground, and until it gets cold and then warms up again, the seed will not germinate. Brilliant, I know, nature's amazing. So for some seeds, if you buy a packet of lavender, a packet of rosemary, or several wildflowers or native perennials or whatever, make sure you understand whether they're going to need cold treatment first. That means that you can either put the seeds in the refrigerator. Some people will fold them into a wet, moist towel in a Ziploc bag. Just do your research to find out whether your seeds will actually germinate without cold treatment first. Almost all annuals and vegetables and stuff that we're talking about here today, they don't need cold treatment. They need the heat right off the bat, like we talked about. But just get to know your seeds and know what you're germinating and why. Another common problem is the spindly little plants. We already talked about this a lot when it comes to light. If you have a spindly looking plant, meaning it's tall and skinny and stretchy, that means that you haven't given it enough light. All is not lost every time that happens. If you have a tomato that's spindly, you can then transplant it deeper into another pot, and it has these fine little aerial roots that'll root out in that pot and be fine. Other plants don't recover quite as well, especially things like lettuce, kale, chard, arugula, vegetables. They just don't do well when they're transplanted from a spindly state. You can't really plant them deeply. They don't have those little aerial roots. So just make sure they don't get spindly in the first place. You can still try to transplant them out, but you might want to go ahead and reseed if they get really tall and stretchy. One of the saddest things that can go wrong when you're doing your own seed starting at home is that your plants fall over at the base and the stem collapses. We'll show what that looks like right here. This is called damping off. It's a fungal disease. It is an unfortunate thing that happens when the combination of moisture overwhelms the plant and fungus just goes crazy. It's a very fine balance between making sure your plants don't dry out and overwatering them. So typically, damping off happens when people are overwatering their plants. There's a few things you can do to avoid damping off. One very easy home remedy that you can do is chamomile tea. We like to take 1 tea bag of chamomile tea and steep it overnight in a gallon of water and use that every time you water. You can make it a little bit stronger, but there's no need to heat it up. We're really just trying to get a cold diffusion of chamomile tea. And if you water your plants with that, it's a natural antifungal. We also mix in with our seedling mixes a product called Armory, which is a bunch of beneficial bacteria that actually eat fungus, and it's a great way to use a biological to then help keep bad guys at bay, and we use that on a lot of our plants. So we've talked a lot about seeds that you can start indoors, and we have that list down in the comment section that you can connect to, or I think it might be a link to our website where you can see that. And what shouldn't you start indoors? I mean, is there anything that you shouldn't try to start indoors? The things that I wouldn't start indoors, in my opinion, there might be other people who disagree, are any of your root crops. So carrots, beets, parsnips, radishes, just direct sow them outside. It is way too much of a pain to transplant them from inside to outside, especially with carrots and long-rooted vegetables. I know some people who have done beets and they like doing that, but it seems like more trouble than it's worth. I would just reserve all my root crops for directly sowing outside. The exception is onions, because onions you can thickly sow inside and then break them apart and transplant them. Since they don't put on a lot of their bottom growth early on, it's easy to transplant them and have them be very, very successful. Whereas with carrots, they make their long root right at the very beginning, and it's just super hard to move them over. Other things that you're not going to start from seed indoors are going to be things where you're planting them from the vegetative growth part already, like a potato or a garlic. You're actually taking the clove of the garlic in the fall and planting it in the ground. And with the potato, you're actually taking a seed potato and planting it in the ground with a couple of eyes. So you're not going to start them indoors. They are going directly outside from day one. Now let's talk about transplanting. I'm going to do a completely separate video later on about transplanting from a small cell into a larger cell. It'll be a much shorter, faster video than we're doing right now. But just be very careful when you're transplanting. You generally don't want to transplant before your plant has at least 2 sets of true leaves, because just a reminder again, pseudo leaves or your dicots, first set of true leaves, the second set of true leaves will come out opposite of the first set of true leaves. So they keep on going, taking turns, right? Once it gets its second set of true leaves, it is an okay time to start thinking about transplanting it. Now, what you want to do is transplant it up into a larger pot, like a coconut coir pot or a 3.5-inch plastic pot. Just be mindful though, because as soon as you pot it up, it's still going to need light. And light will be something that if you're using a nanodome, you're not going to be able to fit 72 plants into 18 pots, which is what fits in a 10 by 20 tray. So just make sure that you have a backup plan. Now here's the beautiful thing, that usually by the time you're ready to pot something up into one of these, especially with your hot crops, you can put them in its own separate tray. And what I like to do personally is start shuttling them outdoors during the daytime when it's nice and warm. They have far more surface area to collect light, so we're not worried about them getting as spindly as they would when they're little itty bitty babies and just have those little itty bitty solar collectors. So if you put them in a tray, take them outside. I like to put them on the east side of my building if possible, where it gets the gentle morning sun and maybe the midday sun, and then bring them in at night to ward off any frost. This is also a great way to gently start toughening them up outside, or hardening them off is what we call. So when you first plant them up into these larger pots, putting them in a sunny window for a couple of days is great, but otherwise start moving them outside for a couple hours one day in the morning, and then kind of bump it up until you can put them out all day long, and then eventually straight into your garden space after the threat of frost has passed for those heat-loving fruiting plants. So lastly, we kind of talked about the seed starting dates and when you should transplant them outside. If you want to be a little bit early in your transplanting, make sure that you're prepared with one of these options. You can use a wall of water type system, or I think these are called plant protectors. And these are a great option for placing around the plant, and it creates a bit of a dome where it absorbs light and heat, more importantly, heat during the day. And because water is naturally thermal mass, it'll radiate it back towards the plant throughout the night. So it not only keeps the plant from freezing, but it actually warms the soil and keeps the plant kind of more consistently heated. So I do recommend these if you're going to plant them out even after the statistical frost has passed. There's always the danger of a frost happening from that point all the way through to sometimes even the 1st of June. Now that hasn't happened in this area in quite a while, but it can happen, I guarantee you. There's some local lore about when to plant things outside, looking for the snow to be melted off of Schaefer or Bogus Basin. Once the snow is gone there, a lot of people like to plant. Really just watch the weather and just be prepared for anything to shift at any point. Another really great option is using a seed guard. Now this is something I highly recommend using whether you're trying to protect from frost or not. This is a lightweight material that you use to cover your beds, and it keeps both the bugs and light frost off of your plants. So when you're doing your cold hardy vegetables being planted out in March, really consider covering them with this. You can either use homemade hoops. We sell the bendable wire hoops that you can set out in your garden. You stick them on one side and move them over to the other. I've got a video on that on our channel here, Garden Minutes, as well, if you want to see how that works. But it keeps the bugs off of them, and it prevents you from spending a lot of money on organic bug controls or losing your crop to nasty little critters like leaf miners, flea beetles, earwigs, all these different guys that like to get into those early baby crops and make a mess of them. Well, that's it for us today. I want to kind of give you guys a rundown on some of the supplies I recommend you grab in order to get started on here. The Sun Blaster Nanodome is a great all-in-one kit. I highly recommend it. Get a small pump sprayer, something that you can mist, or a squirt bottle. The high growth organic fertilizer, or the something equivalent to the Dr. Earth Pure Gold. Not super picky, but have a liquid organic fertilizer handy. The organic seed starting soil, seed trays with your inserts and the bottoms, the no holes bottom unless you're going to be outside, and then you can get the holed bottoms. make sure you get your seeds and make sure that you have the confidence that you can do this, because remember, these seeds want to grow and you're just giving them their wish, and all you need to worry about is keeping them moist, warm, and lit, and they will reward you by growing healthy and happy and strong. And if something does go wrong, it's a seed, plant another one, and you will do fine. Thanks for joining us today on Garden Minutes. This is Lindsay from North End Organic Nursery. If you have any questions, I am going to be checking the comments on a regular basis to see if there's anything that I didn't answer for you all. And please stop by and see us at 3777 West Chinden Boulevard in Garden City. It's been great spending the evening with you guys, and hope you all are very successful in your seed starting. Bye now.